Hi, I'm Cinema Siren, guiding film lovers through a sea of celluloid. Today we're talking about How to Train Your Dragon 2, a wonderful movie directed by Director DeBlois. And we're going to talk to him about his helming the movie and what inspired him about it and what makes it so special. Stay tuned.
The central theme of it is really about finding where you belong and figuring out your identity and how you relate to the people around you. And you've talked about Star Wars being an influence in terms of doing these three that you're doing now. And I do see kind of this as The Empire Strikes Back.
Yay. So
what I'm wondering is, as a writer and as someone who, made a very complicated and complex series of characters interacting in a hero's journey, are you influenced by the Campbell mythology, and were you using that in your writing?
I don't think you can help but be influenced by the Campbell mythology, because he was really, summarizing the way we tell stories as human beings, and we have for our entire history. So there are elements that are common in any story that ultimately feels satisfying and true to our kind. And it's fascinating reading, of course, because he sums up, through a great history of storytelling, common elements that to this day continue to be powerful and aspirational and necessary in our daily lives.
Trust plays a huge part in this film. Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of wove that aspect of the story?
Yeah, I think that our composer, John Powell, put it best. He wrote a piece of music and he called it Lost and Found. And it really does summarize a lot of the themes at play in this story. There are characters that are trying to find themselves. There are characters that are externally finding each other. And there is a sense of kind of lost and wavering through life that Hiccup feels, because he's being tasked with taking over his father's mantle and not feeling entirely cut out to do so. So I think, in a sense, the idea that with being lost and finding one another, there is a great trust, and there's a sense of forgiveness. It's trust and forgiveness, and ultimately exemplified by Hiccup's bond with Toothless. At the beginning of the film, this is 5 years later, and they're inseparable. They are a bulletproof bond, but it felt narratively the best way to really make that feel satisfying throughout the story was to completely break it, and to have them for a moment return to not only enemies, but wrenched apart. And I think there's a real strength to the trust that Hiccup will come back for Toothless, and they will get through this and become stronger than ever.
The three new actors that were introduced and three new characters, I know that Cate Blanchett's character, she looks like the lead character animator had to have been influenced by the way she looks, but the other two don't feel like they're as much. Can you talk a little bit about the casting and how the layering of visually the way she was done versus the other two characters?
Sure. Well, in writing the character of Valka, I was channeling Cate Blanchett from the start.
Oh.
Long before I knew she would be interested. And just as a model of somebody who had a commanding strength to them, which we needed for the vigilante aspect of her character, but also a vulnerability and a sense of regret and remorse for realizing these 20 years later that her son was cut from the same cloth she was, and she wasn't there for him. And so there was a complexity to that, and a sympathy to that we really needed. And so Cate was in mind from the start, and I think that it influenced the design. There was as much of Cate in there, but it's also a mix of like Tilda Swinton and Brigitte Nielsen, somebody who's lean but capable and very, very agile. And that was a physical requirement of the character. But you can't help it when we record our actors. We always have a camera on them as they're performing, and little nuances, mannerisms, expressions, they find their way into the animation, because the animators always carefully study that as well.
It reminded me of Mark Davis and when he was doing Lady Tremaine or Cinderella.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you have a live action reference in mind, it's a nice well to go back to, because it absolutely embellishes whatever acting ideas the animators themselves might have.
What about the other two? How did Djimon Hounsou wind up getting cast?
Well, Blood Diamond is one of my favorite movies,
I love it too.
I just thought the moment where Djimon Hounsou is connecting with his son who's been brainwashed by the warlords, and it's this tender, tearful moment. That's what actually inspired the moment between Hiccup and Toothless. And
Did you tell him that?
I did. And I've always wanted to work with Djimon. I think he's just got such a powerful and unique voice.
Love him.
So when we designed the idea of a stranger from a strange land, without being from anywhere specific, his voice came to mind because he grew up in Africa, but he was also spent most of his life in France, and so there's a really neat combination of an accent that you can't quite pinpoint, and also he just has tremendous power. So I definitely wanted to work with him. And the interesting thing about his physicality is that we took nothing but the voice and the briefest idea that this is a conqueror with ambitions to assemble a dragon army. And we gave that recording to 3 different character designers. And strangely, they all came back with the same design. They hadn't talked to each other. They all had this sort of broad mountain of a man with this long cascading hair, and this sort of eagle-like profile, which was very predatory. And so I thought that was really interesting. That just based on the voice, it inspired that design.
And Kit Harington, who I love also, but he got an opportunity to do kind of a lowbrow accent with that. It took me a little while to figure out who that even was, because he's got a slightly posher, in all of the roles that he's played.
Right.
So how did he wind up in there?
He's always played a very kind of noble, heroic type of character with a certain amount of humility. And here was a character for him to kind of stretch his legs as an actor, because Eret, son of Eret, was designed to be just this cocky, brash cowboy of a dragon trapper who thinks the world of himself and loves the sound of his own voice. So he really played it up, and I think that bringing that sort of Guy Ritchie-like cocky swagger to the role meant that we could just have fun with it. Because he's a character with misplaced loyalty, ultimately. He does what he needs to do to survive, but he sees a loftier idea in what Hiccup represents.
How were the animators involved in the little tiny little specificities of like costume designs and things like that?
Well, it starts with the art department led by Pierre-Olivier Vincent. We just call him POV. He is our production designer, and also our character designer, Nico Marley, who was on the first film as well. Very talented guys, and together they conceived of a lot of the costuming for the characters. Like I'll pick Valka, for example.
Which is the most beautiful.
Thank you.
I love that.
We wanted her to be striking and arresting and daunting when she first appears. And also we wanted to mask her slender build in this sort of bulky suit that could be Drago Bloodfist, it could be the dragon rescuer. We don't know who this person is. But the costume itself was designed to mimic that of a dragon. So it has lots of articulated plates and long extensions that are like spikes, and a very blank stare. And that was immediately then handed to the animators to play with, and what was going to be problematic, what shapes would collide with each other if we didn't articulate them just right, and what was too complex versus where were areas where we could increase detail. So it becomes a conversation, and Simon Otto, who was our head of character animation, was very involved from the very beginning in the designing of each and every one of the costumes.
Well, I'm sure that everyone's really going to enjoy this movie more than people keep saying. I hate to say it's better than the first one because there's such loyalty to the first one, but I think this is a wonderful movie, and that you've done everything exactly right. It's my pleasure to watch it. I'm going to see it again tomorrow, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Wow, that's just an amazing bit of praise, and really encouraging and really bolstering. Thank you.
You're welcome.